The Muromachi period is a division of Japanese history running from approximately 1337 to 1573. The period marks the governance of the Muromachi or Ashikaga shogunate, which was officially established in 1338 by the first Muromachi shogun, Ashikaga Takauji, 2 years after the brief Kenmu Restoration of imperial rule was brought to a close. The period ended in 1573 when the 15th and last shogun of this line, Ashikaga Yoshiaki, was driven out of the capital in Kyoto by Oda Nobunaga. From a cultural perspective, the period can be divided into the Kitayama and Higashiyama periods. The early years from 1336 to 1392 of the Muromachi period are known as the Nanboku-ka or Northern and Southern Court period. This period is marked by the continued resistance of the supporters of Emperor Go-Daigo, the emperor behind the Kenmu Restoration. The years from 1465 to the end of the Muromachi period are also known as the Sengoku period or Warring States period. Ashikaga bakufu. Emperor Go-Daigo's brief Kenmu restoration for various reasons disappointed the samurai class. Ashikaga Takauji obtained the samurai's strong support, and deposed Emperor Go-Daigo. In 1338 Takauji was proclaimed shogun and established his government in Kyoto. However, Emperor Go-Daigo escaped from his confinement, and revived his political power in Nara. The ensuing period of Ashikaga rule was called Muromachi from the district of Kyoto in which its headquarters the Hana no Goshu were located by 3rd shogun Ashikaga Yoshimitsu in 1378. What distinguished the Ashikaga bakufu from that of Kamakura bakufu was that, whereas Kamakura had existed in equilibrium with the Kyoto court, Ashikaga took over the remnants of the imperial government. Nevertheless, the Ashikaga bakufu was not as strong as that in Kamakura had been, and was greatly preoccupied with civil war. Not until the rule of Ashikaga Yoshimitsu did a semblance of order emerge. Yoshimitsu allowed the constables, who had limited powers during the Kamakura period, to become strong regional rulers, later called daimyo. In time, a balance of power evolved between the shogun and the daimyo. The 3 most prominent daimyo families rotated as deputies to the shogun at Kyoto. Yoshimitsu was finally successful in reunifying the northern court and the southern court in 1392, but, despite his promise of greater balance between the imperial lines, the northern court maintained control over the throne thereafter. The line of shoguns gradually weakened after Yoshimitsu and increasingly lost power to the daimyo and other regional strongmen. The shogun's influence on imperial succession waned, and the daimyo could back their own candidates. In time, the Ashikaga family had its own succession problems, resulting finally in the Oenin War, which left Kyoto devastated and effectively ended the national authority of the bakufu. The power vacuum that ensued launched a century of anarchy. Economic and cultural developments. Contact with the Ming Dynasty China was renewed during the Muromachi period after the Chinese sought support in suppressing Japanese pirates in coastal areas of China. Japanese pirates of this era and region were referred to as woko by the Chinese. Wanting to improve relations with China and to rid Japan of the woko threat, Yoshimitsu accepted a relationship with the Chinese that was to last for half a century. In 1401 he restarted the tribute system, describing himself in a letter to the Chinese emperor as your subject, the King of Japan. Japanese wood, sulfur, copper ore, swords, and folding fans were traded for Chinese silk, porcelain, books, and coins, in what the Chinese considered tribute but the Japanese saw as profitable trade. During the time of the Ashikaga bakufu, a new national culture, called Muromachi culture, emerged from the bakufu headquarters in Kyoto to reach all levels of society. Zen Buddhism played a large role in spreading not only religious but also artistic influences, especially those derived from paintings of the Chinese Song, Yuan, and Ming dynasties. The proximity of the imperial court to the bakufu resulted in a commingling of imperial family members, courtiers, daimyo, samurai, and Zen priests. Art of all kinds: Sayuro architecture, literature, no drama, kaigen, poetry, sarugaku, the tea ceremony, landscape gardening, and flower arang all flourished during Muromachi times. Shinto. There also was renewed interest in Shinto, which had quietly coexisted with Buddhism during the centuries of the latter's predominance. In fact, Shinto, which lacked its own scriptures and had few prayers, had, as a result of syncretic practices begun in the Nara period, widely adopted Shingon Buddhist rituals. Between the 8th and 14th centuries, Shintoism was nearly totally absorbed by Buddhism, becoming known as Ryabu Shinto. The Mongol invasions in the late 13th century, however, evoked a national consciousness of the role of the kamikaze in defeating the enemy. Less than 50 years later, Kitayama Takauji, the chief commander of the Southern Court forces, wrote the Jidai Yoshiaki. This chronicle emphasized the importance of maintaining the divine descent of the imperial line from Amaterasu to the current emperor, a condition that gave Japan a special national polity. Besides reinforcing the concept of the emperor as a deity, the Jidai Yoshiaki provided a Shinto view of history, which stressed the divine nature of all Japanese and the country's spiritual supremacy over China and India. As a result, a change gradually occurred in the balance between the dual Buddhist-Shinto religious practice. Between the 14th and 17th centuries, Shinto re-emerged as the primary belief system, developed its own philosophy and scripture, and became a powerful nationalistic leaders. Provincial wars and foreign contacts. The Oenin War led to serious political fragmentation and obliteration of domains. A great struggle for land and power ensued among Bushi chieftains and lasted until the mid-16th century. Peasants rose against their landlords and samurai against their overlords as central control virtually disappeared. The imperial house was left impoverished, and the bakufu was controlled by contending chieftains in Kyoto. The provincial domains that emerged after the Oenin War were smaller and easier to control. Many new small daimyo arose from among the samurai who had overthrown their great overlords. Border defenses were improved, and well-fortified castle towns were built to protect the newly opened domains, for which land surveys were made, roads built, and mines opened. New house laws provided practical means of administration, stressing duties and rules of behavior. Emphasis was put on success in war, estate management, and finance. Threatening alliances were guarded against through strict marriage rules. Aristocratic society was overwhelmingly military in character. The rest of society was controlled in a system of vassalage. The shogun were obliterated, and court nobles and absentee landlords were dispossessed. The new daimyo directly controlled the land, keeping the peasantry in permanent serfdom in exchange for protection. Economic effect of wars between states. Most wars of the period were short and localized, although they occurred throughout Japan. By 1500 the entire country was engulfed in civil wars. Rather than disrupting the local economies, however, the frequent movement of armies stimulated the growth of transportation and communications, which in turn provided additional revenues from customs and tolls. To avoid such fees, commerce shifted to the central region, which no daimyo had been able to control, and to the inland sea. Economic developments and the desire to protect trade achievements brought about the establishment of merchant and artisan guilds. Western influence. By the end of the Muromachi period, the first Europeans had arrived. The Portuguese landed in southern Kyushu in 1543 and within 2 years were making regular port calls, initiating the century-long Nanban trade period. The Spanish arrived in 1587, followed by the Dutch in 1609. The Japanese began to attempt studies of European civilization in depth, and new opportunities were presented for the economy, along with serious political challenges. European firearms, fabrics, glassware, clocks, tobacco, and other Western innovations were traded for Japanese gold and silver. Significant wealth was accumulated through trade, and lesser daimyo, especially in Kyushu, greatly increased their power. Provincial wars became more deadly with the introduction of firearms, such as muskets and cannons, and greater use of infantry. Christianity. Christianity had an impact on Japan, largely through the efforts of the Jesuits, led first by the Navarre's Saint Francis Xavier, who arrived in Kagoshima in southern Kyushu in 1549. Both daimyo and merchants seeking better trade arrangements as well as peasants were among the converts. By 1560 Kyoto had become another major area of missionary activity in Japan. In 1568 the port of Nagasaki, in northwestern Kyushu, was established by a Christian daimyo and was turned over to Jesuit administration in 1579. By 1582 there were as many as 150,000 converts and 200 churches. But bakufu tolerance for this alien influence diminished as the country became more unified and openness decreased. Proscriptions against Christianity began in 1587 and outright persecutions in 1597. Although foreign trade was still encouraged, it was closely regulated, and by 1640 the exclusion and suppression of Christianity had become national policy. Events: 1336, Ashikaga Takauji captures Kyoto and forces Emperor Go-Daigo to move to a southern court. 1338, Ashikaga Takauji declares himself shogun, moves his capital into the Muromachi district of Kyoto and supports the northern court. 1392, the southern court surrenders to Shogun Ashikaga Yoshimitsu and the empire is unified again. 1397, Kinkaku-ji is built by Ashikaga Yoshimitsu. 1427, Edo is established. 1450, Ryoan-ji is built by Hosokawa Katsumoto. 1467, the Oenin War is split among feudal lords. 1489, Ginkaku-ji is built by Ashikaga Yoshimasa. 1542, firearms are introduced by a shipwrecked Portuguese. 1546, Haja Ujiyasu who had won the Battle of Kawago becomes ruler of the Kanto region. 1549, the Catholic missionary Francis Xavier arrived in Japan. 1555, Mari Motoneri, who had won the Battle of Miyajima, becomes ruler of the Kagoku region. 1560, Battle of Okazama. 1568, the daimyo Oda Nobunaga enters Kyoto and ends the Civil War. 1570, the Archbishopric of Edo is established and the first Japanese Jesuits are ordained. 1570, Battle of Anagawa. 1573, the daimyo Oda Nobunaga overthrows the Muromachi bakufu and extends his control over all of Japan. 1573, Battle of Mikitagahara. 1575, Battle of Nagashino. See also, Higashiyama period, Wabi-sabi, Nyaba Kotoba. References. This article incorporates a public domain material from websites or documents of the Library of Congress Country Studies Japan.